So let me just go ahead and apologize right now for all the things that Mark just said. Blame me for everything. It's my fault. They're here. So, no, I'm kidding. I tried to talk them into staying to Arkansas, but Columbus was on their minds. And here they are. And I'm excited and glad they are. Our story, kind of intertwines and weaves together from Indian Springs to, even before they got there. We helped, just to tell you a little bit about myself and my background, preacher's kid. So I grew up in the church before I was even a twinkle in my mom and dad's eye. And Dad pastored 53 years and was my model for everything in ministry. Model and everything for how to be a dad and a husband. I mean, just a godly man, incredible man. And he was my guy that when I surrendered the ministry, if I ever had a question, all I had to do is pick up the phone and call Dad. I mean, it's just one of those kind of deals. And so, we 13 years ago, moved back to, I was pastoring in western Arkansas, south of Fort Smith, and came to work for the Arkansas Baptist State Convention 13 years ago, and started out doing discipleship in small groups, and loved that. That's kind of my passion, is making disciples and figuring out a way to gather them together, and little did I know that was the seed planting of church planting that would come 4.5 years later. And what I ran into doing discipleship at small groups for the state convention was working with a lot of established churches. We would go in and talk about disciple making and talk about small group strategies and multiplication strategies. And I would leave 9 times out of 10 knowing nothing was going to happen with what we just talked about. And it got really frustrating. And not that they were bad people. These are great people. These are good churches. But there were systems set up in place that had been long-standing that would prevent them from doing new things and trying new things to help the church grow. And so this growing frustration grew to the point that I was looking to leave the convention and do something. I didn't know what. I just couldn't keep doing what I was doing. And so as a part of a Super Summer, which is a big youth camp deal we do in Arkansas, as part of an executive staff meeting for Super Summer, the guy that Mark followed at Indian Springs, Darren Neely, and I were having lunch, and he announced to the group that he and Ashley were getting ready to leave Indian Springs and go plant a church. And when he described what they were wanting to do, there were trumpets sounding and bells going off and everything. It is exactly what we were hoping to do and be a part of. And so when we went to lunch, I said, you and I are having lunch today and we're going to talk. He's like, okay, you're scaring me to death. And so we sat down at lunch. I said, unpack this. What are you doing? And by the end of lunch, I said, Christy and I are in. Christy is my wife, in case you were wondering. Not this Christy. And that would have been awkward. And I'm taking Mark's wife and we're coming with you. So, no. But so I said my wife and I are in. And so we were the only family not from Indian Springs as a part of the initial launch team. So we were the outsiders. The only people on the team that I knew were Darren and Ashley, and then Josh, who's Ashley's brother, who's our worship leader. And so that week we went to their first launch team meeting and met everybody else. And Christy and I walked away knowing that this is what we're looking for. Now, the tough part about this is we were a part of my dad's church at the time. And so I then had to go to my dad and say, look, we can't stay here. We're going to go help plant this church. And which he was awesome with. He said, I'm surprised you stuck with us this long, because I'm kind of weird and do things differently anyway. And so we started City Church in that'd be Easter of 2009. And so, is that right? Yes, that's right. And well, actually, we started launch team meetings July 2008, but then officially launched 2009. And so we're working on this church plant, and honestly, looking at the team that we had, it was an all-star team. We've got We've got guys that are evangelistic. We've got guys that are disciple makers. We've got guys that are creative and gals. We've got folks that can teach. We've got, mission-minded people. I mean, when you're looking at everything you need to be a part of a launch team for a church plant, we've got all that. And they're incredible, incredible people. Two of the guys on that launch team are now on staff at other churches. One is leading a Life Church campus in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, doing an incredible job with them. He kind of got called to ministry as a part of this, so it was a launch out for him. But looking back at that team, I mean, it was set up. Darren was kind of the rock star youth pastor, that if anybody's going to plant this creative, innovative church, it's going to be him. The worship team was good. Everything was set up for success. And about 3 years into it, things started falling apart. Just kind of began to disintegrate a little bit. And there were several reasons, I think, for that. One, I think all of us came in with unrealistic expectations. If I heard it once, I heard it 100 times. In 3 years we'll be running 500, and and the potential was there. I mean, it could have. If we'd have, kind of kept our stuff straight. But behind all of that, with this mindset, we're going to be running 500 in 3 years, was we're going to get to the point where we've got enough people and I don't have to work anymore. That was kind of the unspoken thought on the launch team. And about 3 years in, everybody was tired. It was a whole lot more work than we thought it was going to be. Things didn't go as smoothly as we thought it was going to go. The funny thing, for those of you who know Darren is one of the best communicators I've ever heard in my life. He's an amazing preacher, teacher. He is the most socially awkward guy one-on-one you will ever meet. He's fantastic with a group, which makes no sense. Put him on stage in front of thousands of people and his light shines, but you put him one-on-one in front of somebody and it's just downright awkward. I mean, it's terrible. So he was not a pastor in the truest sense of that word. He's not going to call you and check up on you. He's not going to hold your hand through a difficult time. I had some knee surgery, and he came to see me in the hospital, and I was like, man, just go. Just please don't ever come see me in the hospital again. It was just bad. And so that's Darren, and everybody except Christy and I had experienced that for like 10, 12 years. I mean, these are folks that had been friends with Darren Ashley for 12 years. But there was something that happened with the unrealistic expectations that when we planted this church, all of a sudden, it seemed like everybody expected Darren to become something he had never been before. So all these old pictures of what a pastor should be and what a pastor should do and all of this stuff, we didn't know they brought that with them until about 2 years in, and the criticism started. And so I traveled a lot, so I was there maybe 1 or 2 Sundays a month, because we were out, starting new churches. And so by the time the criticism was really ramping up, it was beyond repair in a lot of ways by the time I really heard what was going on and how bad it had gotten. And so that initial launch team, made up of all these rock stars, just started flaking off. And this couple left, and then this couple left. And of course, Darren and Ashley are internalizing all of this because these are their close friends that they love dearly, and then families involved with Josh, worship leader, and his wife, and so all these splinters start happening. So Christy and I were the only couple out of the initial launch team that stayed all the way through to the end. Darren started having panic attacks. Ashley told me one day, his wife, she said, we were talking through it, trying to figure out a way to encourage him and help him, and she said, I just want my husband back. I mean, it just got tough. And so 7 years in, we shut the doors and closed City Church, and it had a short run, but a great run in a lot of ways. There are 3 guys that surrendered the ministry while we were on staff there. One of them planted a church that didn't go so well either. Another one's on staff at Life Church, and another one's on staff at another church in North Little Rock. and doing well. Tons of folks who were not believers who became believers. 2 or 3 kind of nonprofit organizations that started out of this as well. So there's some significant things that happened, but it just didn't last very long. And so I look back on that experience and think back, because everybody asks me all the time, what happened with City Church? Why did that thing not go? Because, all the external things, that people had in their mind said, if any church is going to survive, this is the one that's going to make it. And so I think there are a lot of things, really kind of 3 things kind of boils down to that I want to encourage you guys with today as you move forward. The first thing is intentionality in everything that you do. We did a lot of stuff when we planted City Church, but not all of it was geared toward impacting parts of our community or segments of our community that we had a chance at kind of reaching with the gospel and making disciples and helping to kind of grow the church. We did city serve days all the time, everything from working down at Riverfront Park to Union Rescue Mission to food distribution stuff. And really, none of those things were who we were as a church. We were a church made up of musicians and artists and young professionals, and planted right in the middle of a large gay community in Little Rock. So it, any given Sunday was lesbian come to church Sunday. It was just I got up for make announcements one Sunday, and I looked down. There was like 7 couples. And it was noticeable. They weren't hanging on each other or anything like that. It was just noticeable. And I walked off stage and said to Darren, I said, did we put out a flyer? It's like, this is lesbian church Sunday or what? It was noticeable. And so there was that whole segment of the population there that nobody was reaching. Nobody was touching. They're young professionals. They're trying to figure out life, and they've got baggage just like everybody else. And there were some intentional things we could have done with that crowd that I think could have produced some significant fruit. And there were 4 or 5 that made professions of faith. There are probably 20 or 30 others that did not. And so, recognizing kind of those touch points where God seems to be doing something and engaging those touch points with intentionality, I think, kind of hurt us. And so as you guys think of, this area is Dublin, is this what area this? Dublin, Powell area. So as you think of Dublin and Powell area, asking questions, okay, what's the story of this area? Will Mancini has a book called Church Unique where he talks about finding the kingdom concept. And the way you do that is looking at your community and figuring out what he calls the local predicament. What are the needs? What's the story of the community? Who's here? Who's not here? What do they do? What do they not do? Where do people gather? All of that kind of stuff. And you really kind of get at the heart of the community, which, my guess is up here, Ohio State football would be a huge gathering place and rally cry for everybody. So how can you take that and leverage it, for building relationships and doing community and engaging people with the gospel? I don't know if there's a local school around here. Typically schools are a great place to, kind of connect with and volunteer at and build relationships and connect with young families. So, finding what those things are. And then kind of look at what he calls, I don't know why he calls it this, is a dumb term, but I didn't write the book. He calls it apostolic esprit, which is like, looking at your team and figuring out, what are your passions, what drives you, what gets you up in the morning and what keeps you up at night. When you look at your community, look at the church, look at, all of that together. And then the last thing is the collective potential. What are the resources, the gifts, skills, talents, people, all that stuff that you can bring to bear on that local predicament. So looking at Dublin Powell area and figuring out, okay, what is the local predicament? What about that local predicament are we passionate about? And what resources can we bring to bear on that local predicament that might, bear fruit? And that's your kingdom concept. If I'd read that book back then before we started City Church, we would have thought about this a whole lot differently. And differently, I said it, adverb, Scott. And so intentionality, not just you want to kind of sow seed wherever you can, but what are the intentional engagement points for Dublin Powell area that will really kind of keep you guys moving forward? I mean, you guys here are taking on shape. You're taking on form as a church. You've got some characteristics. So who are the people and places where you can engage that you guys can leverage your collective potential and your passions to bear on the community? So think about that. The next thing I would say is majoring on relationship building and disciple making, and make sure everything you do is reproducible. What I mean by that is we did, and I've seen this, I've been a part of, maybe 50, 60 new church plants over the last 9 years now that I've been directly involved with, coaching church planters, working with teams, and these are some of the things I've seen that if churches survive, they've done well. If they didn't, then they didn't do this well. In your disciple making, clearly define what a disciple is, how you make one, and how to keep them growing so that then they become disciple makers. Jesus, when he called disciples, he said to them, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, he said, come follow me. So there's a portion of disciple making that is following Jesus, making a commitment to follow him, do what he does, be where he is, join in with what he's doing. In the middle part, he says, I will make you. So there's some changes that have to happen to be a disciple of Jesus. We can't stay the same and follow Jesus. It just won't work because he's calling us to something different. And he says, then I will make you fishers of men. And so the last part, discipleship is not complete until they've reproduced themselves, until we've reproduced ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean we have to sit down and memorize, an evangelism formula, that we share with somebody and they, give a response and then, okay, I've made a disciple. That's not what Jesus is talking about. But building the kind of relationship with somebody to where you guys want to spend time together, to where they see something different in you and begin to ask some questions, and then you get to introduce them to Jesus, who makes them into something different, and then you walk together as you follow Jesus. And that's kind of what disciple making is. And so teaching them to pray, teaching them to read their Bibles, not taking anything for granted. I think we took too much for granted early on with our new believers, assuming, because all of us had grown up in church, all of us knew how to read our Bibles, knew how to pray, we'd seen it modeled, all this stuff. And particularly in a context like Columbus, I'm sure there's a lot of people that have no church memory whatsoever. They didn't grow up in the church like a lot of us did in the South. They don't have any of these experiences. If they went to church in the past, it was probably because a family member took them to a kids club or a vacation Bible school, or they went Christmas and Easter, and so everything they had was very minimal. And so you can't take anything for granted. So what is a disciple? How do we make one? And how do we help them grow? And is that reproducible? Can we do this over and over? What are the basic things we need to communicate to help this person move from me feeding them to them feeding themselves? And so we didn't do that well with City Church. We kind of took a lot of things for granted. Okay, hey, we've got this new believer here. Welcome to City Church. Jump in a small group and we'll figure it out together. Yeah. And it just left too many things to chance. It just didn't work in most cases. So that intentionality, that reproducibility, and then probably the last thing here I would say to always be thinking about, and it kind of ties in with the reproducibility, is thinking of multiplication. So there are a couple of things that you do in church life that don't ever stop. You never stop sharing the gospel. You never stop making disciples. And you never stop raising up leaders. You guys are kind of the core team right now. You're the core leaders. You guys have a lot of gifts and skills to bring to this, but you can't do everything. And there's going to come a time where you're going to get real tired. As things go along, you may be there now. You're saying, not gonna. We are. It's going to happen. And so who is around? Who maybe not here tonight, but who is somebody that you can bring alongside you to do what you do as a part of Access Church? Whether it's running the sound and the video, or playing an instrument, or singing, or leading a kids group, or leading a small group, or just going out and sharing the gospel, or organizing a community ministry event. Taking into consideration all the gifts and skills and talents that that people have here, and how can we pair them up with somebody who's already doing it so that we can reproduce and multiply those leaders. I don't know if, how much Mark has shared about Alan Hirsch with you. Alan Hirsch is a missiologist and a writer that we both love. He's a huge kind of paradigm shifting guy for me, and he talks. He has an interesting take on Ephesians chapter 4. That whole chapter, but particularly 11 through 16, where it says that, and he gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, for the building of the body, equipping the saints, unity of the Spirit, all that kind of stuff. And so how he breaks that down in there is that it doesn't mean that we need to have some new Peter, James, Johns, Matthews, apostles. We need to have some new Elijahs, Elishas, Isaiahs, Jeremiahs, prophets. New evangelists like Paul, Timothy, all that, Barnabas, Silas, all them. What he's saying is those giftings have to be evident in the church for the church to continue to grow and expand. And he says, for too long, people have relegated leadership in the church to the shepherd-teacher kind of model. And when it's just a shepherd and just a teacher leading the church, then there's no external expressions of ministry that are front and center in the church. There's no apostles who are running to the margins, running the community to move the church forward. There's no prophets looking at the gaps between the church and the world and saying, hey, we're not hitting it here. There's broken people over here. God's leading us here. There aren't those evangelists that tell the story and draw the net and just share Jesus with everybody and bring people in. And I think he's dead right. And not everybody has a little of those in them, but nobody's Jesus. Mark is not Jesus, in case you did not know that. I figure you had figured that out, but just in case, there's no way he can be all of that for the church. There's no way you guys can be all of that for the church, even though each of you will have some of that wiring in you. There are going to be those people that are just naturally drawn to the community. Scott is a great example of an apostolic kind of guy. He's a missionary. He's always thinking, how do we take the gospel to these people who don't have Jesus? Whether it's halfway around the world or north side of Fort Smith, It's a great example of that. There's some of you that are wired that way. You see a group of people that has no connection with Jesus. How do we do that? Some of you are the prayer warriors and more prophetic in orientation, where you just have a sense of what God is saying and how He's leading the community and where the gaps are in Dublin, Powell area that the church needs to be engaging. What are the big issues that you need to be taking a stand on? Some of you have that evangelistic bent, that outgoing, I just want to tell everybody I know about Jesus. we have a new church planter that's planting in a little town in northeast Arkansas called Truman. And when he told me where he wanted to go and plant, he said, "Do you know a whole lot about Truman?" And I was like, "Nope." I said, "Little bitty town in northeast Arkansas. Why are you wanting to go there?" And he said, "I grew up there." And this is the guy that he was a meth addict. He started drinking alcohol to get off meth. That didn't help. Yeah, this is all, hey, for a drug addict, makes perfect sense, you know. And so this is all before Jesus. Went to prison because of his addictions, was saved in prison, and been a believer for about 6 years. And what he said to me was, he said, "Jesus has rescued me from a lot." And he said, "I know a whole lot of people that are struggling with the same things I struggle with." And he said, "So I want to go to the gutter and be a part of a rescue mission to pull them out as well." So, and I've watched Shane over the last 2-3 years, lead over 150 people to Christ, because here's a guy that was saved from a lot of stuff and knows what it means to be rescued from all that, and he just can't wait to tell somebody else how to get out of that. Some of you are wired that way. You've got stories to tell, and you want to tell that story to others. That's that evangelistic component. Some of you are shepherds, and you want to care for other people. I preached a message on this passage in a little town in South Arkansas, and kind of explaining all 5 of the giftings and callings, and how they evidence themselves in the church. And got done, I walked to the back, and the sound man was a guy named Max. He was an ambulance driver, first responder, paramedic. And we got back to the back, and he was a character anyway. And he said, "Brother Dave," he said, "I heard all you said up there." And I'm like, "Well, great, Max. Thanks for listening." And he said, he said, "We have all these people coming in this church." And he said, "Somebody's got to care for these people here. They're already here." And he said, "I just see people come in and they go out, and nobody's caring for these people. Somebody's got to do that." And so what he's thinking is that's your job, as the pastor. That's what the pastor does. And I said, "You know what, Max?" I said, "You're exactly right." And I said, "You know whose job that is to do that?" I said, "That's the shepherd's job." "That's right. That's the shepherd's job." I said, "You know who the shepherd is in this story?" He says, "Who?" I said, "It's you." And I said, "Because the first thing you said to me when I got back here is that somebody needs to be taking care of the folks that come in here on these days. That means it's first and foremost in your mind. Therefore, God's wired you to be a part of that." And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, "Never thought about it like that." "Well, I guess you didn't." "Well, now you know." And I said, G.I. Joe says knowing is half the battle. So, but that's how it manifests itself, And then you've got the teachers that just every time they read something new in Scripture, they just want to tell you about it. And they want to, unpack the Greek, and they really want to dive in deep, and they'll spend hours poring over God's Word and unpacking all that. And we need all 5 of those functioning. We need the teachers to unpack and communicate God's Word in a creative way. We need the shepherds to take care of people and protect the flock as well. We need evangelists that are going to go out and share. And all of those things lead to multiplication of disciples. All of those things lead to the expansion of the church. All of those things impact and enhance the kingdom here in Dublin, Powell, and around the world. And the reality is none of those things cost a whole lot of money to do. It's just taking how God has already wired you and putting it into practice for the building up of the church and fulfilling the rest of Ephesians chapter 4. Had I known that then, City Church would probably still be here today. Darren and I got to talk last October. He came in for a disciple-making event, and we got to spend a lot of time together. And he said, Dave, and he's a part of a really great church in Houston. They survived the Harvey and the flood and are doing fine. They became a refuge place. Their church did for a lot of displaced people, and really some significant ministry happened there. Do what? What was the church? The Met. Used to be Metropolitan Baptist Church, and now it's just called the Met. And And so they've got 3 campuses now, I think. I mean, it's a large church. And but we were talking about some of these things together. And he said, Dave, he said, if I'd have known then, what I know now, he said, I wouldn't be here in Houston. I'd still be with City Church in Arkansas. And I said, well, Darren, if I knew then what I know now, I'd still be at City Church with you. and so to kind of wrap all this up, for you guys, kind of moving forward, and Mark mentioned it a while ago, Matthew 9, 35 through 38, a little summary passage, kind of the middle of Matthew there, talking about Jesus' ministry, and kind of sum it up. Said he went through all the towns and villages, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, teaching the synagogues, healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed, helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, he said, ask the Lord of the harvest to raise up workers to go out in his harvest field. And so there's 3 things there that as you guys move forward, I think they're absolutely essential for the health and growth of Access Church. And the first one is to ask Lord of the harvest to raise up workers. So there's got to be a prayer component to this. Over the last couple of years, I've never been good at prayer. ADD, don't sit still well. I'm an extrovert. I'm always on the go. And so all these guys that could spend an hour in prayer, have just been my heroes, and I could never do that. Now I've learned to compensate, over the years. A preacher saying he's not good at prayer is that's a terrible thing. And, but I just never have been. And so for the last 2.5, almost 3 years, I've been a part of this men's prayer group at our church. Our pastor at Summit is this ginormous prayer warrior. I mean, he's just one of the godliest men I know. And Bill has been kind of teaching me to pray. And so every Wednesday morning from 6 to 7, I'm spending an hour in prayer with about 30 other guys. And if you'd have told me 5 years ago I'd be doing that at 6 o'clock in the morning, I said, you're smoking crack, because there's no way. And but it's transforming my spiritual life and my walk with Jesus. And I kind of compare it to going to the gym. When you first go to the gym, it's painful, and you walk out and you think, okay, that did absolutely nothing. I'm hurting worse than I did when I walk in. I don't feel any slimmer. I don't feel any stronger. What's the point of all this, And then after a month of doing it, you start noticing some changes, small changes, and hey, maybe there's something to this. A year or 2 years down the road, you're not thinking the same. You're not acting the same. You don't feel the same. And it's this kind of slow build up how Jesus just transforms us and changes us in ways that we don't even see at the time, but others do. And so Jesus told his disciples, look, you got to ask God to do something, in this harvest. You got to raise up workers to go out in the harvest. You guys can't be the ones to do everything. So there's got to be some multiplication. And ask Jesus who those people are and what you need to be doing with them to help them go out with you. It's not raise up workers to go out in the harvest instead of us. It's to raise up workers to go out alongside us. And so we can't just raise up people and send them and us sit back and not do anything. That's not what Jesus is talking about there, because he's talking to the disciples that he sends out in chapter 12 or chapter 10 of Matthew. And so ask the Lord of the harvest to raise up workers for this harvest. Never stop raising up leaders. To go out into his harvest field, to be sent. There are over 300 plus sending passages of Scripture throughout the Bible. God is a sending God. I heard a guy say one time, Jesus didn't come and die on the cross just so we could sit in church. There is a sending component. Come follow me and I will make you fishers of men, that external go component. Go and make disciples of all nations, all peoples, baptizing them and teaching them, and know I'll be with you always. So there's that sending component. There is a place where all of us have to go. Each of us has a sphere of influence with people that others don't have. Mark and Christy are going to know people in their neighborhood, their friends of their kids that you guys may not know. You guys are going to have a sphere of influence in your workplace or your neighborhood or gym or whatever. And so if you have that sphere of influence and you have that local community where you're engaging, God has sent you there for a purpose, for a reason. If you live in a particular neighborhood, God has sent you to that neighborhood. If you have a particular job, God has sent you to that workplace. If you have a particular third place hobby or hangout place, God is sending you there as a missionary. So spend significant intentional time in prayer, not just praying for our ills and doctor's visits and all that stuff, but praying for Dublin, praying for Powell, praying for persons of peace and gatekeepers in the community and touch points where God seems to be working and finding ways to join in. Continually raising up leaders. How do I reproduce myself? How do I bring somebody alongside me to kind of apprentice in what I'm doing, whether it's small group leader, children's ministry, worship ministry, sound technology, evangelism, whatever. And then have that sending component. There's got to be a time where we go. Got to be a time where we engage people. And in a place like Dublin and Powell, and I don't know the story of this community, this part of Columbus, but my guess is there are going to be a lot of skeptical people with no church background, no desire, no need. They're not looking for what you have. So you got to give them a reason to want what you have. And so there's a lot of pre-evangelism, relationship building that has to happen to open up those conversations. Those things are not wasted. Every conversation I had heard somebody put it like this one time. He said, think of evangelism as the face of a clock. And he said, every time you engage somebody and share the gospel, share Jesus with them, you move them a little bit further along the clock. And a little bit further and a little bit further. And then before long, they're all the way back around and responding to Jesus. Roy Fish, who was an evangelism professor at Southwestern, used to say all the time, it takes on average any given person 7 times of hearing the gospel before they're open to responding to what you're sharing. Are you okay with being number 2 or number 4 or number 6 and then somebody else being number 7 that draws them in? Every time you share the gospel, it has an impact. God's not going to let that go, let that be wasted. So think of it in terms like that. You're on a continuum. You're moving people a little bit further closer to responding to Jesus. And don't lose heart in that. So ask God to raise up workers to go, to be sent, and bring people along with you as you do that. All right. Any questions or anything? Not that I have any answers. He calls me all the time, and I don't help him a bit. So.
I've lived here for almost 2 years now, and it is hard to make friends in this community. Mm-hmm. To meet people, it really is. I went yard sailing one time, and I was talking to Gail, and she said, I've lived here 11 years, and I don't know either side of my neighbors.
Yeah.
And it's,
that's everywhere.
To a community that is so close-minded.
Yeah. Yeah, that's everywhere. And here's the one thing that there's no way to get around. Anytime you strike up a conversation with somebody you don't know, there's the danger of it becoming awkward. So just be awkward for Jesus. It's kind of my motto in life. I mean, there's no way around it.
Really
because you never know. Do what?
You're really good at that.
Hey, I am. I'm telling you, I own that. You never know how they're going to respond, and so there's a vulnerability there that we just have to be willing to be vulnerable and just strike up that conversation. And not everybody's going to want to have that conversation. Sometimes they will. I've sat by 2 different people on the planes on the way up here. One of them didn't want to talk to me at all, and the other one didn't want to shut up. So I had both, and I'll engage with you as long as you want to engage. But there's an awkwardness there to initiating something like that. And here's the reality. In the reality of all that is there's a spiritual warfare component to that. Satan doesn't want you having those conversations. And so every time you think to have one, he's going to say, oh, this is going to be awkward. Oh, they're not going to respond. Oh, you're going to say something stupid, and they're not going to like it. And all those thoughts start running, through our minds. And we just got to push back against that and say, you know what, I'm just going to be awkward for Jesus. G.K. Chesterton was this British writer and kind of theologian and sometimes preacher, and he made a statement about disciple making. He said, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. And you just got to start somewhere. The first time Michael Jordan picked up a basketball, he sucked. He's probably better than any of us first time we picked up a basketball, but he wasn't great. He practiced all the time. And so having conversations with strangers is something you gotta work at, and just push through the awkwardness. And say, you know what, doggone it, I'm going to talk to you, and you're going to like me, and or run away screaming, one or the other. No middle ground here. So.
Call Mark and I'm in jail.
Yeah. Arrested for stalking this person that wouldn't talk to me. And and that's the whole neighborhood thing. That's we've got good friends on our left. We just moved to a new neighborhood a year ago. We've got good friends on the left of us. The family on the right, I cannot engage them in conversation for nothing. They're not from America. They're from somewhere else, and I can't place the accent, and I hadn't been able to draw them into conversation long enough to figure out they're all black belts in something, and so, which is awesome because my oldest son is a black belt in Taekwondo, and my youngest son is black belt recommended, so he's getting ready to have his black belt testing. So I'm dying to have some conversations with them, and and that's a connection point. I can't draw them out. Introverts, awkward, man, tough to draw them out. Do what? No, I am not a black belt in anything.
That's the language they speak.
Yeah, I'm a black belt in running away, and so until I pull a hammy. And so. But yeah, it's Arkansas too. Our neighbors across the street, they're kind of awkward people as well, and we've had 2 or 3 conversations. Typically, when we're out mowing, together, that's when I try and engage. When I'm out mowing because people are out, and I'm a nice enough guy, but he's not interested in having an ongoing conversation yet. So one of the things we're doing in October with we have a small group that meets in our house, and there's 2 couples from our neighborhood that are coming or getting ready to start coming that we had prior relationships with. So we're going to do kind of an ice cream get together in our front yard. And we're just inviting everybody in our neighborhood. We live in kind of a loop. It's called Loop Road. And then it makes a loop. We're very literal in Arkansas. And so you can't make it too complicated for us Arkansans. And so then I live on Hidden Creek, which kind of makes a tongue off of Loop Road. And so we've got a kind of a closed off neighborhood, very defined neighborhood. And so we're doing our best to try and connect with as many people in our neighborhood as we can. So we're going to have an ice cream get together in our front yard. And our neighbors to the left of us are going to jump in with us. And then one of our small group couples is going to come help us do it as well. And so, our kids, we use our kids in this. To help hand out flyers and stuff. They like doing it. Nobody says no to a kid. They may not come, but they'll take the flyer, and everything. So just trying to find ways to connect with our neighbors as well. And so we've been in the neighborhood for a year. Good relations to the left. Somewhat conversational relationship across the street. Not much to the right. And so we're working on that. It just takes time. So. Oh yeah.
That's a really slow
Yeah.
shut.
No, really. Wait. I want to talk to you.
She ran inside the garage door now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty funny. Yeah. And you don't have to lead with it. If you were to die tonight, where would you spend eternity? Question. No, don't do that. Just yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. If that garage door closes before you hear my proposition, do you know where you're headed? I mean, really? Looking in the garage door window. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going around back. Yeah. That's right. Well, and think about this too. I went one of our new church plants that started in January. I went to their kind of launch Sunday and knew several of the folks in the church, of course, all the launch team, and I trained all of them. And standing back there in the back, and I saw this gal standing off to the side like she was wanting to talk. I thought, man, she looks familiar. And then about halfway through the conversation I was having, it dawned on me who she was. And she was, she and her husband were saved and baptized at City Church that we planted before. And so when I got done talking, Jennifer walked up and said, "Hey, Jim, Randy and Jennifer Craig, did y'all ever know them?" Oh, I'm sure you've heard the stories. Got lots of Randy and Jennifer stories. And so I said, "Hey, Jennifer, how you doing? What are you guys doing here?" Oh, this was a City Church as well. And we got hooked up with these guys about 2 years ago. And I said, "Man, that's great." I said, "Well, where's Randy?" She said, "Oh, he's back there helping check kids into the kids ministry." Now, here's the story of Randy. Here's my first memory of Randy. Randy and Jennifer had come Sunday morning to church and didn't know it at the time, but Randy was struggling a little bit with alcohol. And that's kind of an understatement. And so we had small group down at the church one night, and Jennifer came. Randy wasn't there, and so where's Randy? And well, Randy's sick. And so it's pouring down rain outside, and about 10, 15 minutes in the small group, Randy comes walking in the door, soaking wet, bleeding all up and down his left arm, mud from head to toe on his left side. He had ridden his moped to the church drunk in the rain and wrecked and came on anyway. And so he came, oh, dude, it's awesome. I mean, you're like, okay, there's a story here and we got to hear it. We're shutting down small group to hear Randy's story. And so he comes in and sits down. He's like, ah! Right in the middle of small group, and Brad Newcomb, Brad, who recovered from all that stuff as well. He said, "Randy, you all right?" "Nope. Feel like fill in the blank." And he didn't say fill in the blank though. And so small group is derailing at this point. And about every 2 seconds, he'd lean over and look at Brad. "Brad," just like this. "I need to talk to you after this." "Okay, Randy, we'll talk after this." "Brad, I need to talk to you after this." About 3 or 4 times. So finally, Brad shuts down the small group. "Lane, let's go talk." And so he's out of his head. And Brad said, "Randy, I think it's time for you to go to rehab." So seriously, we got him in rehab next day there in Little Rock. And he was there for about 8 weeks. Came out as clear-eyed as I'd ever seen him. First Sunday back, makes a profession of faith. We baptize him the next Sunday. Just complete transformation. And so here I am at this new plant, New City Church plant, launch Sunday, and there's Jennifer, and I turn around, and Randy's down on his knees looking at kid eye to eye and family, helping get their information, checking them into kids ministry. And I thought, who in their right mind would have picked Randy to be a part of the children's ministry? Yeah. And so there are people out there that are not even on your radar right now that God is preparing to raise up for you to reach them, draw them in, and then they're going to be part of your multiplication. So out of the harvest will become your new leaders. So as you, which changes the way you go out into the harvest. I mean, you're not looking just for converts. You're looking for your next children's worker. You're looking for your next small group leader. You're looking for your next, worship pastor. Who knows? Maybe your next church planter. Because God, that's God's business. Right? That's what He does. takes a broken life, transforms it, and then uses it for His glory. So there are those folks all around here. They don't know they need what you have yet, but God does. And He knows where they are and what it will take to get them to have their eyes opened. And so pray, that God will open their eyes, give those opportunities for you to engage, that He'll raise up these new leaders to go with you as you go into the harvest. So, all right, can I pray for you guys? And then we'll close out. Father, we love you. God, I'm so excited. What's going on here with Access Church, and Lord, I know it's hard, and I know there are many weeks where they wonder if they're having impact and making a dent in the lostness here in Dublin Powell area. And God, there's nobody that wants to see lives changed more than you. And I know Mark and Christy and this crew longs for that deeply. It's a burning desire within them, and it keeps them up at night. It wakes them up in the morning. And so, God, I just pray that you would show them these touch points, these places and people that you're already working in and raising up, God, that they can join in with you in what you're doing. And maybe it's a neighborhood, maybe it's a third place kind of environment, a hangout place, maybe it's a workplace where you decide to show up and bring about some transformation, or wherever it is. Maybe there's a key leader in a neighborhood, or a connector in a neighborhood, or a workplace, or whatever that you need to bring transformation to with the gospel before those places open up. God, I just pray that you would do that, do what you do. And God, let Access Church be a part of that. And Lord, encourage them. God, every step of the way, give them those little words of affirmation, those little victories that remind them of why they're here and why you sent them here, that you are working and doing something in this area. God, I pray that you would multiply each of these leaders, that you would reproduce them over and over and over again, raise up a whole new batch of leaders that before they started didn't know you at all. And God, let that be a testimony of your power, your Spirit's working in this part of Columbus. And God, I pray we could get together here in another couple of years, and this would be a completely different place and a completely different story because of what you did. And God, just give them rest. God, give them a break from the weariness and energy to keep pressing. And God, you just keep showing up. We love you, Jesus. In your name I pray. Amen.